Just like Walt Disney, Jay is, playing the longer game. He can see the things that others can't. Just like, Walt Disney started using colors when others were skeptical of it, right? Jay is using, all the latest tools, all the technologies, narrative based podcasts. So basically, he's playing the longer game, seeing things that others can't see. He's trusting the process.
He, for me, if I'm being very honest, Shubham, gives me a very thoughtful elder brother vibe. And I genuinely feel that he's a creator who I can almost trust with the money, right? Like with the money
Yeah.
and everything, I'm like, I can invest in this guy because this person knows what he's talking about.
See, he's the kind of guy you can live in a jungle and with just an axe and he'll build an entire city out of it, right?
But I love this line, and this is the first line, by the way, of his introduction when he's explaining the short version of his life. I am building a life of creative independence. Okay, welcome to another episode of Creator Deep Dive. Before we start this episode, I'd just like to request you to please subscribe to the YouTube channel because we keep releasing videos every week and Creator Deep Dive also releases every week. So make sure that you've subscribed to the YouTube channel. But today on the show, we'll be speaking to you about a creator who you can describe as a creative entrepreneur, a businessman, a creative scientist. We're, of course, speaking about Jay Clouse, who's got many titles associated with him. But before we introduce Jay Clouse to you, I want to talk about Shubham. Shubham, how's it going, man? How are you?
New place, new vibe, new creator,
Yeah,
buzzing at this moment. Yeah.
that's lovely, because today's creator is a slightly new format, Shubham. If you'd agree, like the format that we'd be covering, and the creator himself is kind of different. Like the stuff that he's been up to and the kind of stuff that he's been doing, and not a very large creator, Shubham. Like not somebody who
Yeah.
everybody will know. Not certainly not at the level of, let's say, Mr. Beast or even a Michelle Khare for that matter. But he's really niched it down, and he's really popular among his niche, right? Like you do you think you could do that?
Yeah, I think he's the front runner of a niche. He's,
Right.
he's not exactly a nano creator, but
Yeah.
he's a star in his own niche. And,
Yes.
speaking
Yes.
of stars, Joe Casabona, who was
Uh-huh.
recently on our Fireside Chats, he
Right.
called him the Walt Disney of podcasting. How
Okay.
cool is
What
that?
is that? What is that? What do you think that implies, though?
Well, it implies that, just like Walt Disney,
Hmm.
Jay is, playing the longer game. He can
Hmm.
see the things that others can't. Just like, Walt Disney started using colors when
Hmm.
others were skeptical of it, right?
Hmm.
Jay is using, all the latest tools, all the technologies, narrative based podcasts. So basically, he's playing the longer game, seeing the things that others can't see. He's trusting the process.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, no, I think for me, my introduction to Jay's work was actually the podcast. So again, people might get confused by this, but his podcast is called Creative Science, but it was earlier known as Creative Elements, right? And I had heard about this through another podcast I was listening to, and I just got introduced to that show. And that's when I sort of came through with this, and then, I really liked the tone of the show, which was again, really understanding from a creator's perspective as to what was working for them, what are some of the elements that were working for them, what was the entire, some of the math behind it, some of the numbers behind it, some of the strategies behind it. So I really liked his work. That's how I came across his work. And interestingly, as recently as yesterday, I was watching his YouTube interview. I haven't completed it yet, but I was watching his YouTube interview with Paddy Galloway, who is, of course, one of the most popular, YouTube
YouTube consultants,
consultants.
yeah.
Who's worked with a bunch of amazing creators, and he's really been one of the most prolific consultants in that genre.
Yeah.
But let's also talk about his journey, right? Like his journey, Jay Klaus's journey, and I also want to understand how you came across Jay. Like, how was your introduction? And then actually, let's talk about a bit of his journey and what he's sort of been through.
Yeah. So I came across Jay on LinkedIn about last year, the same
Okay, on
time.
LinkedIn. Okay.
Yeah. So it's basically, a space that he occupies on LinkedIn is like he's a thought leader, of course, and he's creating a lot of content. He's supporting other creators. So basically, I went to him to get some support to,
Hmm.
to read his newsletter and what he's up to. So yeah, and thanks to my boss at previous company who asked
Hmm.
me to follow J Klaus.
Hmm.
So that's how I came across him. What about
Yeah.
you?
No, for me, it was the podcast actually. And he's one of those creators probably that you wouldn't know him by name, because, again, he's not there on every person's feed, or he's not there on, your newsletter all the time and whatnot. And he's not probably you haven't seen him around with thumbnails, with those crazy thumbnails that Mr. Beast does. But you've definitely seen him around, right? If you're a part of this economy, if you're part of this culture, then you have seen him around. For me, it was the podcast, but now because he started video podcasting as well, like and he does these
Yeah, last
interviews
year. Yeah,
last year itself. So that for me has become a very big discovery tool, that, oh, you know what, okay, he does a lot of videos as well. So that, I think, is a great tip here, that for discovery, video is great. Like, of course I heard him on audio, but I would have never recognized him, right? I would have never been like, oh, that's Jay, because I don't know how he looks like. Video podcast, for that, certainly for that, it really helps when you have discovery going. And of course he uses Riverside and all of those things. So it's pretty
yeah.
interesting how he started his video podcasting journey himself. He, for me, if I'm being very honest, Shubham, gives me a very thoughtful elder brother vibe, right? Like, he's
Hmm.
somebody who
Okay.
I know, and we've discussed so many creators, right, on Creator Dude, Shubham. Like, we've discussed from a Michelle Khare to a nerd writer and whatnot. But I don't know how they look at their finances, right? I don't know how they look at their business and whatnot. Jay Clouse, firstly, is very transparent with it. Like, he does a lot of videos. In
Yeah,
fact, one of his
yeah,
recent videos was also about how he earned, I think $300K and whatnot. And of course, he associates the sum with it. So he's been very frank with it. And I genuinely feel that he's a creator who I can almost trust with the money, right? Like, with the money
yeah,
and everything, I'm like, I can invest in this guy because this person knows what he's talking about, and he has some monetary and financial sense, right? Like, do you get that
yeah.
feeling as well from him, that vibe that he sort of exudes?
Yeah, I mean, his newsletter claims that you become a smarter creator
Yeah.
by just reading that for 10 minutes in a week, right?
Right.
So first of all, to begin with, Jay himself is a, let's call him a smarter creator
Yeah.
to differentiate him from, the others that we have talked about so far.
Correct. Correct.
And yes, I think it's part of his niche to talk
Mm.
about, how to diversify your revenue stream,
Yeah.
and how to increase it, how to become
Mm.
smarter about it.
Mm.
So yeah, I completely agree. He's kind of in a different league altogether,
Yeah.
where,
Yeah.
I mean, that there are certain, number of guys, thought leaders who are there, who constantly talk about this stuff, but he's reliable, unlike
Yeah.
others,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
And look at this really beautiful wording that really caught my eye, Shubham. I'm gonna read it out, right? When you go to, let's say, his website and whatnot, and you're sort of exploring what he does, of course, bunch of courses, bunch of workshops, and he's in, like, done all of these associations in the past, and he's built all of these products. But I love this line which says, and this is the first line, by the way, of his introduction, when he's explaining the short version of his life: I am building a life of creative independence. Right. And here it's interesting, this positioning that's there. And this is, again, positioning, this might not matter for people who on the outside, that, okay, fine, you might be
Yeah,
creatively independent. And we keep speaking about financial independence, but he actually does, he's done an essay on it, which is, creative independence versus financial independence. And I think for creators, this part is also so important, right? Because a lot of the burnout
yeah,
also occurs not just because you're working too hard, but also because you're working on things that you don't like, because there's this friction that you can feel. So
yeah.
that creative independence that he speaks about, I think it's gold. It's a very good way, again, a smart way to position himself for
And
his own good.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And you mentioned that this is the first line, right?
Yeah.
And Jay is, always working mostly on the opening moments, whether
Correct.
it's the first line or the first 90 seconds of his
Correct.
video. He, infamously don't believe in clips
Yeah. Oh.
to use
Okay.
distribute your long form content. He feels
Right.
that there is no correlation between, increasing number of downloads with the, number of clips that you're
Right.
producing. So he doesn't waste his time or his editor's time on, creating
Yeah.
clips nowadays. He just focuses on the first 90 seconds,
Hmm.
like how to give it, the best spin, so that the viewer doesn't leave, or
Correct.
as he calls it, the churn, the
Yeah.
listener churn, something like that.
Of course.
So the first line, first 90 seconds, I think Jay comes out as a person who's, who wants to put his best foot forward.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's exactly why he claims very boldly that within 10 minutes a week you can
Correct.
become smarter.
Exactly. And I really liked his web, when you go to his website as well, he has a dedicated type for tab for essays. Right? You can actually
Wow.
go through all the essays, and all the essays have been tagged. Okay, these are the, the fundamentals, these are the core principles, these are the tools and whatnot. So here's a person who really wants you to equip, who wants to equip you with a bunch of tools, right? A bunch of things to do as to how you can become not just a smarter creator, but actually, be a smarter creator with your work, right? It's not just that, oh, I'm in my thought, I'm a better person, I'm a better creator because I know about all these things, but I can actually experiment with a lot of stuff as well. Which is why, if
Yeah,
you think about it, right, if you think about, again, the wording and the positioning we've been speaking about, elements, science, it's a lot of things with experimentation, with actually doing the stuff, right? Like one is the theory and the other is actually doing stuff. So I think that's why you see him with so many courses, right? So many courses he does, memberships, right? So I think he's really doubled down on that. But it's not just about the videos, and everything else happens on the back burner. He uses all of these tools very strategically. He uses, like, his courses, his freelancing modules, his newsletters, his essays, and all of this to sort of have that balance. Videos are also, of course, there with the podcast, which is Creator Science. But I think he's playing this very smooth balancing act, which has allowed him to be the Walt Disney of creators, I think. Right. And I just like to, and then the reason why it's I think this is happening, Shubham, I think that's also important to know, because I don't think this happens via fluke, right? This has to be with some thought process, and this has to be through the journey, right? Everybody's journey is very unique, and the experiences are very unique. So I think for me, what really stood out for me is how he broke down his entire life into these chapters, right? The three chapters, as he calls it. So the one was the startup chapter, which lasted for 7 years. Then was the freelance chapter, which lasted for about 2 years. And now he's in the creator chapter, or the creator journey, right? So he's really demarcated that, oh, I was initially very, when startups were a thing, and of course startups are still a thing, you can argue, but back in, let's say, the 2010s, the early 2010s, startups were really the thing, right? With Airbnbs and
yeah,
Ubers of the world, and these companies coming through. And then, of course, you had people who were almost burning out, and that was not a very pretty scene, so people started freelancing. And then there was this middle ground, okay, I'm freelancing, but what am I kind of doing? And now it's the time for creators, right? So
yeah,
he's always
absolutely.
been on again, that visionary. You have to be a visionary when, once you sort of, you want to do these things. And I can actually put my money on him, right? Because he can see the future almost. I mean, nobody
Yeah.
can see the future, but at least he can, put his money where the future is heading. So I really appreciate that about him as a creator.
Yeah, and he's really well connected with creators, and I think that's a
Exactly.
testimony to your evolution as
Yeah.
a professional.
Correct.
Once your network effect kicks in, right? Once your business becomes people oriented, I think you have entered the next stage of your life or your business.
Correct. Correct.
And just like you said, like you can put your money on J, I can put my time on J, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Right. So yeah,
Exactly. Yeah, and speaking about time and money, I think it's also very important to realize, Shubham, that this is one creator who has not made making YouTube videos his entire personality, right? Like he is a person. Oftentimes, what I see, and this is something that also we've seen in creator deep dive itself, is that a lot of people just are doing, which is great. Of course, you should be immersed in your craft and you should be focusing on that. But you would also see Jay speak at a conference, right? Speak
yeah,
about how short form content is being used, how audio content is being used, about long form and whatnot. So he really wants to, he understands the power of branding, of having a good, like, of public relations, let's say, of having the network. So I don't know if this works for everybody, but certainly this approach of having this seed, this entrepreneurial mindset to a creator, I think more creators should really have that, and should really check out and appreciate his work.
yeah, absolutely. And this comes when you have the long term vision
Yeah, yeah,
in everything, in your work,
exactly.
in your life, because there's no shortcut to it. Even if you're
Correct.
very smart, you have to go through the process.
Exactly.
And Jay is very process driven guy. He makes
Yes.
extensive notes on his podcast creation process or everything. You can see every word is very thought after. It's
Correct.
not
Correct.
fluke, right?
Exactly. Exactly. But my last question to you, Shubham, we've discussed his a bit of his style, a bit of his journey, and, like, how he looks at stuff. But where do you think he goes from here? Because now, let's say, when you speak about the three journeys, right? We spoke about the startup journey, we spoke about the freelancing journey, and now, of course, the creator journey. Where do you think, like, does he become like the king of the empire? Arguably, he already is the king of his own empire. But where do you think he can go from here when it comes to being a creator or being a creative entrepreneur?
You know what? I'm not sure with Jay because Jay is not a very rigid creator. He changes tack if he sees, the feedback coming in. So see, he's the kind of guy you can leave in a jungle and with just an axe and he'll build an entire city out of it, right?
Nice.
So I'm not sure where he's going to go from here, but
Yeah.
of course it's only upward he's going to go,
Yeah.
and he's going to learn a lot. He's going to share those learnings with us as well. So that is very exciting. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's really the core of this episode, right? Like about learning and experimenting, and just the creator journey is often lonely, and that's what, of course, even Thousand Faces Club aims to reduce the loneliness, or like really combat that with these conversations about creators and whatnot. But I think it's very important for people to follow his journey, because the trajectory that he's been following, right, the entire trajectory that he has been very interesting. And again, it is difficult to predict, as you mentioned, because I don't know, tomorrow he might be into AR and VR creation, right? Like in
Yeah,
terms of how he's a
yeah.
creator, like that might be the next part of his journey, where he is the person you see on your Vision Pro headset, right? Like he's probably the number one person there. So very interesting creator to keep your eyes and ears open to. Like you would want to sort of be in the same room as him. Lots to learn. But do tell us what you find interesting about Jay, whether it's his YouTube tactics, his podcasting, his essays, or some blogs, or freelancing courses or modules. He does a bunch of stuff, but I'm sure you like something in particular. So do tell us in the comments. That's been it from this week's episode of Creator Deep Dive. I'm Shrivar,
I'm Shubham.
and we'll see you next week. Bye bye.